The Philadelphia Eagles are quite literally just stockpiling every Georgia guy they can find. The Eagles are the first team in the common draft era to select 5 defensive players from the same school over a 2-year span. And why not? The Bulldogs have dominated college football recently, and the Eagles are looking to continue to build a crazy good defense. And taking guys that have already dominated at the college level is a good start. The Georgia Bulldogs are on a ridiculous 2-year stretch. They have lost a single game and won back-to-back national championships. This past season, Georgia went 15-0 and won the national championship 65-7 over TCU. The year before, the Bulldogs went undefeated in the regular season before losing to Alabama in the SEC championship. The Bulldogs followed it up with a win over Michigan in the college football playoff semifinal to set up a rematch in the national championship versus Alabama. The Bulldogs got their revenge, winning 33-18 to win the program's first national championship since 1980. Georgia has been dominant, and the best unit on that team has been the defense. Nobody in college football has been able to slow down the Bulldogs defense, and it makes perfect sense to try to target those guys that have excelled in Athens. The Eagles had 2 first-round picks at this past draft. The highest was at 10. Philadelphia had the pick from a trade with the Saints that helped them select Chris Olave last season. Well, the Eagles ended up actually trading up 1 spot with the Bears to 9 to take defensive tackle Jalen Carter. He is a bit of a head case. There are a lot of questions about his character, and in January, he was allegedly recklessly driving and street racing, which led to the deaths of Georgia offensive lineman Devin Willock and Chandler LaCroix, a Georgia staff member. He also showed up to the combine out of shape, and there were reportedly red flags in his interviews. There are concerns, but you could argue Carter was the best overall player in the draft, and the Eagles got him at 9. Carter was a 4-star recruit in the 2020 class and was the 4th best defensive tackle in the country. He played 8 games as a true freshman in Athens, recording 14 tackles. In 2021, Carter had 37 tackles, 3 sacks, and 8.5 tackles for loss. It earned him a spot on the 2nd team All-SEC. Well, he was even better last season. Carter had 32 tackles, 3 sacks, 7 tackles for loss, and he forced 2 fumbles. Carter was a unanimous All-American. He was spectacular and made the obvious decision to declare for the draft. Philadelphia still owned their first-round pick, which was at 30. Since they lost in the Super Bowl, it would have technically been 31, but because the Dolphins lost their first-round pick for tampering, it was 30th. The Eagles decided to use the pick on outside linebacker Nolan Smith. He was a legendary recruit. Smith was the #1 player in the 2019 class and is the 20th best prospect of all time. As a true freshman, Smith had 18 tackles, 2.5 sacks, and 2.5 tackles for loss. Then 2020 was that shortened season due to COVID, so he only played in 7 games with 21 tackles, 2.5 sacks, and 2.5 tackles for loss. The best season of Smith's collegiate career came in 2021. He had 53 tackles, 4.5 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, 3 forced fumbles, and an interception. Smith did return to Athens for his senior year, but it was cut short after he suffered a torn pectoral muscle in late October. Before he went down, Smith played in 8 games with 18 tackles, 3 sacks, and 7.5 tackles for loss. The Eagles got 2 Georgia studs in 2022 and 2 more in the first round this year. Well, in the 4th round, Philadelphia made history by taking a 5th Georgia defensive player, cornerback Kelee Ringo. Ringo was the 4th best recruit in the 2020 class and was the top corner. He actually didn't play his first season at Georgia because of a labrum injury, so he took a redshirt. Ringo was a starter for the Bulldogs as a redshirt freshman. He recorded 34 tackles, a sack, 2 interceptions, including one he took back for a touchdown in the national championship, and 8 passes defended. Ringo followed it up last season with 43 tackles, a forced fumble, and 2 interceptions. He was named 2nd team All All-SEC. Ultimately, Ringo only played in 2 seasons at Georgia, and the Bulldogs won it all both years. All 3 of the guys the Eagles drafted out of Georgia at this past draft won 2 national championships. The 2 they took in 2022 only won once. Philadelphia had the 13th overall pick last year and ended up selecting defensive tackle Jordan Davis. His rookie season probably didn't go as well as he had hoped. Davis was more of a reserve, and he spent time on injured reserve after an ankle injury. He had just 18 tackles and 1 tackle for loss. Davis got a string of starts earlier in the season, but that ankle injury really hindered him. Still, the Eagles surely think he can be a stud like he was at Georgia. Jordan Davis wasn't a big name recruit. He was a 3-star and the 29th best defensive tackle in the country, but he made an immediate impact in Athens. Davis got some starts as a freshman and was even named to the SEC All-Freshman team after he had 25 tackles, 1.5 sacks, and 1.5 tackles for loss. He followed it up as a sophomore with 18 tackles, 2.5 sacks, and 4.5 tackles for loss. Davis was named 2nd team All-SEC in 2020, that COVID-shortened season. Davis had 16 tackles, a sack, and a tackle for loss. Davis was good, but he wasn't anything truly insane until his senior year. Davis dominated. He ended up winning the Outland Trophy as the best interior lineman in the country and was a unanimous All-American. Davis had 32 tackles, 2 sacks, and 5.5 tackles for loss, and most importantly, won a national championship. Jordan Davis wasn't the only guy from Georgia drafted months after their national championship last year. The Eagles used their 3rd-round pick on Nakobe Dean. He did end up playing in every game for Philadelphia last season, but was mainly a special teams guy. Dean finished the year with just 13 tackles and 1 tackle for loss. It will be interesting to see if he can become a starter in the NFL someday, but he sure was good at Georgia. He was just a 5-star recruit and the 2nd best inside linebacker in the 2019 class. Dean dealt with injuries his first season in Athens, but still finished the year with 25 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, a forced fumble, and 2 passes defended. In 2020, Dean had 71 tackles, 1.5 sacks, and 1.5 tackles for loss. He wasn't some crazy draft prospect until his junior year, his last season at Georgia. Dean ended up winning the Buckus Award, given to the nation's top linebacker. He was a unanimous All-American and, of course, won a national championship. Dean finished the 2021 season with 72 tackles, 6 sacks, 10.5 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, 2 interceptions, and 6 passes defended. He did it all for the Bulldogs. The Eagles have made it a point to really target that dominant Georgia defense that has won the last 2 national championships. But the Eagles also traded for a former Bulldog at the draft, running back DeAndre Swift. He was not on either of those championship teams. Swift actually left after the 2019 season. He was a 5-star recruit in the 2017 class and was the 4th best running back prospect. Swift ended up dominating at Georgia. He had a role as a freshman and rushed for 618 yards and 3 touchdowns despite being buried on the depth chart behind Nick Chubb and Sony Michel. Then Swift broke out as a sophomore with over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns. He was named 2nd team All-SEC. Then as a junior, Swift was 1st team All-SEC after he had 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns. Also, it feels important to say that he was really important in the passing game too. Over 3 years, Swift had 600 yards and 5 touchdowns. He was good at Georgia, and that's why the Lions took him in the 2nd round of the 2020 draft. Swift put up extremely similar stat lines in his 3 seasons in Detroit. He was a solid back, but also had a major role receiving. He averaged 560 yards and 6 touchdowns per season, plus 400 yards and 2.3 touchdowns through the air. Swift was good, but not good enough, and that's why Detroit wanted to move on. The Lions sent Swift to the Eagles for a 2025 4th and a 2023 7th round swap. He isn't on defense or a member of either of those national championship teams, but he's another dog in the Eagles locker room. You can't really blame the Eagles for just drafting a bunch of Georgia players. The Bulldogs have run college football for the last few years, and their defense has been leading the way. Kirby Smart was the defensive coordinator at Alabama and churned out some seriously good NFL guys, and now he's doing the same thing at Georgia as the head coach. The Eagles know exactly what they're doing by drafting all of these Bulldogs, and I bet you it's gonna work too.